Hello. Welcome, everybody, to Checked Out or Pushed Out, Understanding Youth Disengagement from Canadian Democracy. My name is Rowan, Gentleman-Sylvester, and I lead an organization in Vancouver called CityHive, and we specialize in youth engagement and civic education at the local level, which has felt very relevant as we've had lots of conversations about how to bring things down to the local over the last couple days. I'm a facilitator by training, and I feel like we've been in a dark room all morning, and we are between you and lunch. And so I'm just going to do a very, very quick poll of the room. Can I get a show of hands of who here knows the name of their MP? Fantastic. It's a conference about voting and democracy. I kind of hope that's a high number in this room. Now cast your mind back to when you were, let's say, 13 or 14 years old. Can I get another show of hands if at 13 or 14 you knew the name of your MP? Okay, again, fairly high rate, but we're probably sitting at about 30 or 40%. So just a reminder, it hasn't all changed, but we are going to be talking about some of the things that might be a little bit different from when some of you in the room were young. And I am joined here today by some phenomenal experts, and I'm going to give them very brief introductions, just so you know some of the expertise that they bring to this conversation, but I encourage you to check them out online and see their full bios for a little bit more information. But across from me on the other side of the table here, and armed with a Master's of Philosophy and Gender Studies from the University of Cambridge, Ziyana is the chair of Equal Voice Calgary and leads violence prevention, public affairs, and policy projects through a gender lens here in Calgary and across Canada. And next to Ziyana, we have Erin. I actually forgot to check before. Is it Novakowski?
Novakowski.
Novakowski, amazing. Erin Novakowski is an HRC-funded graduate student of University of Calgary's Political Science program, bringing nearly a decade of lived experience as a disability justice activist, I'm sure, organizer and influencer who is passionate about using digital media to build community, increase representation, and mobilize politically. So spearheading and spinning off from that conversation earlier with YouTube and talking about our digital media space. And last but definitely not least, next to me here we have Ken Boyd, who holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of Toronto and is the Director of Education with CIVIX, where he designs educational programming on digital media literacy, constructive dialogue, and civic participation. And I want to start us off with a really quick fire round. So in one word or phrase, how would you describe youth civic engagement in Canada right now? And Ziyana, I'm going to come across to you first.
Okay, well, I'm going to try and dodge being pigeonholed here and say multifaceted, because I think there's plenty to be hopeful about, but also plenty that young people are challenged by and that we really need to be attentive to right now.
Okay, multifaceted, love it. Erin, coming to you.
I would say promising, but with a big old asterisk at the end.
Promising asterisk. Okay, and Ken?
I'm going to say in need of support. Put hyphens between all of those words.
A very hyphenated in need of support. All right, so that is the context that we're coming to this conversation for. And one of the things I did want to just kind of add as a little bit of context that I don't think will be coming as new information to anyone in this room. But of course, Canadian youth are navigating a very rapidly changing civic landscape, as we all are. It's shaped increasingly by digital media, polarization, economic uncertainty, and evolving and eroding trust in institutions. And so actually, when I come to you, Ken, and I feel like given your work with civics, people talk a lot about youth disengagement. In fact, it was one of the words or phrases used in the title for this talk today. They often imply that young people lack interest in democratic or civic processes. So I'm really curious how that resonates or not with you and the work that you're seeing across Canada.
Yeah, I'd say it doesn't resonate. I think that when people talk about sort of youth disengagement in the political process, things that people appeal to are often things like voter participation rates in big elections. And we do see sort of, definitely lower rates compared to sort of other sort of populations in the sort of younger range. But we've also seen sort of a recent uptick in voter participation at the federal level. The last federal election, there was a good voter turnout from the youth. There's other factors that people sometimes bring in there as well, like sort of membership in political parties, rates of volunteering for campaigns, things like this, things that are nice and easily measurable. But there's so many of so many other avenues that young people are taking that are not so easily sort of measured in this way. So there's the research that does exist shows us that young people are very active politically in online sort of political engagements, in activism, in protests, in all these other kinds of avenues of political participation. That's not simply going to the polls. Going to the polls is extremely important, but lots of other things that they're doing there as well. I mean, something that we have seen in our research in working with young people is that young people are really super interested in politics. They want to talk about politics. They want to be engaged in politics. Now, if you ask a young person, do you care about politics? Like if you ask a teenager, do you care about politics? They'll probably say no. If you ask them, do you care about sort of the big questions about how we ought to live together in a society? They'll say yes, right? So I think when we sort of think about young people, they might not be like super interested in like politics. Like what are we talking about here? Are we talking about sort of the very partisan sort of political system of, voting for candidates and parties and things like that? Or are we talking about sort of a broader conception of, social issues, ideological issues, these issues about how we should live together? Young people are interested in that.
Amazing. Yeah, we see the same thing in the work that we're doing in the kind of Metro Vancouver region, and I'm sure those who do work with youth across the country see similar patterns of behavior as well. Ziyana, I want to come to you next, because I think you have a really interesting insight into kind of different barriers and ways that folks maybe aren't being recognized. And so maybe to say that more clearly, how are young people actually engaging civically today? And how are those forms of engagement not being valued, not being recognized by perhaps, and I think Ken started to speak to this, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about any specific examples from your work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll very much pick up on that thread from Ken that I think we need to look beyond engagement with traditional political institutions as the only metric through which we gauge young people's passions and desire to understand the world around them. A lot of civic youth participation is happening through community movements, through digital advocacy, through mutual aid, nonprofit volunteerism, and financial support. So for example, even though Gen Z generally has smaller wallet sizes, under 25s are actually a demographic for which charitable giving is growing rather than declining, which might be surprising, but I think speaks to Gen Z and youth passion for issue-based engagement. I work with young people both through Equal Voice and other organizations like Plan International. And I see so many young people mobilizing around climate justice, around gender equity, Indigenous sovereignty, affordability, violence prevention in ways that can be incredibly impactful and incredibly sophisticated. For example, there's a Voices Against Domestic Violence rally that has happened annually in Calgary at City Hall over the last handful of years that is spearheaded by a high school student. And that's one of many examples that we can point to. I also think that young women and gender diverse people are doing a tremendous amount of invisible civic labor. And that can be things like moderating conversations around their dinner table with family members who maybe have different political orientations and values, or educating their peers. And this is work that is maybe not traditionally recognized as political participation, but that is really important for the health of our society and for our democracy.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ziyana. And I feel like you were just touching on that online civic space, and so I feel like that's a great segue to come to you, Erin. I know, as we all know, young people are incredibly involved in online spaces, and so I'm really curious on your thoughts on the role of digital media in shaping young people's political understanding and perspectives, identity rather, and participation.
For sure. I think to answer this question properly, there's probably some important context that I can give. I come to this panel wearing 3 hats. Geez, must be a really bad hair day. My first hat is I am a political scientist in progress. I'm a grad student, so I talk about youth civic engagement in the classroom. I am also an educator in this, I'm a learning educator in this space, so it's something that I care about every day. My second hat is an influencer. I spent many years of my life doing community organization, primarily through platforms like TikTok, Instagram. I have had a platform of upwards of 600,000 subscribed followers, or whatever you want to call it. But my third hat, which kind of ties all that together, is just I have experience as a disabled youth, or maybe someone who was a youth. I don't know. I get really excited about vacuum cleaners now, so I don't know if I can still be considered a youth. But 24, I am a youth who is engaged civically, but there are two important sort of caveats to that. The first one is I only ever became civically engaged out of necessity for my survival. I was in a policy space where there was medication that was going to not be available to me if I did not speak up about it, and so I did. And as a high school student, I was able to use social media to do a letter writing campaign. And so yeah, I guess just that lived experience, I think, is the most important aspect that I can bring. And given that, my answer to the question of what role digital media is playing, I think there's an extremely important role. As a youth, I wanted to be civically engaged, I needed to be civically engaged, but the only way that I could be was through digital media. That was the only access I had to participate and advocate for myself and build a community. So I think that overall, the effect that social media has on youth and providing access to youth who maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago wouldn't have been able to be a part of the conversation in any capacity. I think that that outweighs all of the risks, which there absolutely are, and I think some of my fellow panelists maybe will speak to those risks later. But my ultimate answer to this question is it's a really important role, and digital media, I would shout it from the rooftops. Social media activism is, it's a complicated topic, but it has kept me alive, I would argue. So that's my 2 cents on what role digital media is playing. I think that it is the sole tool for many youth to become engaged.
Yeah, thanks so much, Erin. And Ziyana, I'm going to come back to you because I know some of your work also touches on digital media, but maybe getting at some of those less positive sides of it through your work with Equal Voice, but also in your day job as well. So I'm super curious, maybe if you can start speaking to some of the other sides of the digital media landscape, because I think it's incredibly powerful, and it has created so many opportunities for those who would not otherwise have opportunities for engagement, but there's also some dangers.
Absolutely. And I'll sort of put on my violence prevention advocacy and activism hat here, because to Erin's point, digital media can be an incredibly valuable and worthwhile avenue for participation in social movements, but it also comes with a lot of harms. In one of our panel discussions yesterday, I know it came up that young people are being drawn into political extremism in ways that we need to be attentive to. And one of the things that the research hub I work at, which focuses on violence prevention, thinks about is that pipeline towards radical misogyny that our algorithms enable, and how that can lead to real-world violence. Many of us will be familiar with the term manosphere, which kind of refers to an online network of influencers and spaces that promote anti-feminist and increasingly extreme ideas about gender, about power, identity. And those pipelines often begin with influencers. We can think about names like Andrew Tate or Sneeko or Jordan Peterson, who exploit the loneliness and the uncertainty and the social isolation of our moment, and gradually sort of transition a lot of young people, and especially young men and boys, towards more rigid and extreme worldviews. From my standpoint, I think these influencers really function like informal civic educators. They shape how young people are understanding politics, identity, gender, belonging, even reality itself. And that's something that I think we should all be concerned about, because it does affect all of us. We know misogyny is linked to political polarization, violence more broadly, and if young people are being socialized into distrust and dehumanization. Oh, sorry. Thank you. But to pick up on that point, if our young people are being socialized with that level of distrust in each other, that will affect the health of our democracy as a whole. So I think one of the really important things we can be doing to support the capacity of young people to engage with our democracy is to kind of disrupt these narratives that our young people might be vulnerable to. So for me, this really underlies the importance of community building and moving upstream of these harms, fostering healthy models of masculinity for our young boys, which is a really important aspect both of violence prevention and, I would say, civic engagement more broadly.
Wonderful, thanks, Ziyana. So one of the things that we're trying to do with this panel is do a little bit of benchmarking, kind of level setting for the room around what the current state of youth engagement, disengagement, being pushed out, whatever you may call it, or lack thereof. In fact, real youth engagement is looking like. Thank you. And so one of the other things and areas that I wanted to draw our attention to is the fact that in this room today, we have decision makers with us, and we're in a province right now. It's been the topic of conversation this entire summit, where there's some very relevant policy decisions happening. One of the ones that we haven't heard about, or I haven't been in the room if it's been brought up, is that on March 31st, Bill 25, removing politics and ideology from Alberta classrooms, was introduced. And so one of the things that I wanted to invite our panelists here, and maybe I'll defer to Ken and Erin, but also Ziyana, if you want to weigh in, what do you think policies, or what role do you think policies have to either enable or prevent youth democratic participation?
Yeah, I can definitely start with that. I think that policies have, a tremendous ability to either, dissuade or encourage youth democratic participation. I mean, removing politics and ideology from Alberta classrooms, that's quite the title of the bill, right? It's clickbaity too, right? I mean, if you read the bill, there's actually nothing in there that says that we are going to remove all the politics and all the ideology from the classrooms, but it does sort of dance around it, right? It talks a lot about sort of making sure that there's the establishment of classrooms that are neutral, right? So neutrality is a big sort of point here. It talks about sort of focusing on, I sort of wrote it down so I could remember here, core education principles and essential knowledge, right? These are some of the things that are in here. Now, of course, that's not saying explicitly that we're going to take all the politics and the civics out of the classroom, but we know from our own research that civics education is something that tends to be sidelined, that tends to not be considered part of that sort of like core knowledge or, that part of education. And of course, if we're talking about, quote unquote neutral classrooms, like, what does that mean, right? How are we supposed to establish this, especially when it comes to issues of which there is, significant disagreement or, loud minority opinions that might be sort of hateful or harmful? Like, do we have to give lip service to these? I think what is going to end up happening is something that we've seen, across the country working with teachers, is that educators are going to be less encouraged to engage students in political discussions, in politics, in their classrooms. And I mean, they have every reason to be worried about it. They have concerns about administration from parents now with this kind of policy that might be, pushing them away from this. We also know that classrooms are incredible opportunities for young people to become interested in learning about politics. I mean, this is what the research shows, that students who engage in politics and political discussions in their classrooms, they're more involved in politics generally, they follow the news more, they're more interested in listening to people who disagree with them, right? So this is a kind of policy, right, that, it really does seem like it's going to dissuade that kind of participation. I want to say something briefly just because Erin and Ziyana touched on it as well. I think, one of these other policies that we have maybe reasons to be worried about are a lot of these policies around social media bans, right? As Erin was talking about, this is a tremendous opportunity for young people, along with the potential harms of which, of course, there are many, but for young people to start engaging in politics, to be politically active. We've seen out of Australia just very, very recently, some research has shown that of the young people who were kicked off of social media, now it's been a bit of a dog's breakfast in Australia, right? So a lot of them haven't been. But of the ones that have been kicked off of social media, fully half of them report losing access to the news and losing access to opportunities to engage in civic participation, right? So this is not a hypothetical, right? This is actually playing out in places that have implemented these bans. So I think something that, Ziyana said that I think is super important is that you need to provide some support, which is why I sort of said this is, this is in need of support. If you take something away, right, if you take away that avenue for civic participation, say through social media, and you don't give young people anything else, you don't do any community building, you don't help young men who might be, moving down this kind of path, right, then you're not supporting the youth. You're just taking stuff away from them.
Thanks so much, Ken. Erin, anything to add?
Yeah, I can absolutely jump in. So I think bringing in like the aspect of intersectionality kind of helps to really illustrate how policy, obviously, I think everyone in this room would agree that policy has a very direct impact on youth engagement. So like, for example, as Ken touched on the title of removing politics and ideology, I myself am a disabled person, but I also am a queer person. And so thinking about what queer youth hear when they read the title, removing politics and ideology, much of what I see from conversations happening is they're actually hearing it's removing queerness from the classroom. And so beyond this, even not just bills or policies that are directed at youth particularly or at the classroom, things like the rejection of Bill 206 recently, so that was going to be a bill that would introduce comprehensive accessibility legislation across Alberta. I am perhaps open and a little too open, so let me give you an illustration of this. Maybe the youth are disengaged, or maybe the youth were actually super excited for the first day of the summit, of the theoretical summit, that they're going to do some civic participation and engagement at, but maybe they're stuck in the bathroom covered in pee because the TELUS Convention Center has only one properly accessible washroom across 2 blocks of downtown. Maybe they were actually gonna engage in some civic participation, but they are not there. That was me. I left yesterday covered in pee. And I'm not afraid to say that in a room full of very fancy people because I think that you need to hear it. So yeah, Bill 206, another example. Also, oh, wow. I have never been applauded for that before, but thank you. Anyways, yeah, other things like changing disability support programs in the province. I am only up on the stage and in university because as a disabled person, I am extremely, extremely privileged in so many other ways. And things like changing the support program that I use and so many others rely on to stay alive. If that was happening during my transition from youth to adulthood, that might have entirely taken university out of the question for me. That would not even be on my list of to-dos because at the top of my list of to-dos is always stay alive. And that is so much more relevant for so many other people and people who have more intersections that are working against them. But yeah, so I guess I don't even know what the original question was. Oh, the policies. The policies matter, and I would invite everyone to, yeah, in going forward in this conversation, sort of the title, pushed out or checked out. Maybe there's like a secret third option that is a bit more sinister, not sinister, but not positive. That would be my answer to that.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. Ziyana, anything you wanted to add in terms of policies, either things you don't like or things, you're also welcome if there's any shout outs you want to give to policies that you think have been really interesting or positive in the sector as well.
Sure. This is perhaps something of a partisan remark, but I find myself straining to look for any examples of positive policy action in the last number of years. But something I think we do need to talk about in the context of removing ideology from the classroom is also what's been going on related to last summer's ministerial order to remove books from school libraries that contained prescribed sexual content, which we know disproportionately impacted queer and queer of color communities whose stories are represented in much of the material that was flagged for removal. And to Erin's point about the importance of taking up an intersectional lens to pay attention to who falls between the cracks and who our systems, more than, sort of unintentionally excluding, are kind of designed not to incorporate. That experience of growing up as a queer person in the world without access not only to role models in political life, but just in our media, just in our books, just in our culture, means less room for understanding who you are. Putting my equal voice hat back on, a lot of what we talk about in terms of the importance of having women and gender diverse folks occupy positions of decision-making, of elected decision-making power, is that seeing that as a young person changes your understanding of what's possible for you. And I think it's really important to kind of witness that having those materials available for young people in libraries means opening up possibilities for who young people might become.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ziyana. I'm hearing so many different threads here, and I think one of the great things about this conversation is we're broadening this idea from voting, and I think this has been an ongoing thread that civic engagement is between elections as much as it is during, but really into our day-to-day lives. It's the books that we read, it's the online spaces and the community spaces we occupy, the accessibility of the venues we're invited to speak in, and so much more, and all of the policies that impact those spaces, and I'm hoping some of the policy makers and decision makers in this room are taking notes. Before we go to audience questions here, I do have one question I'd love to just go around and wrap us up with, hopefully to leave us on a more or less positive note. And that is, what's something that is actually giving you hope, that's actually working right now, that you want to kind of highlight or shout out? And it can be from your work, but it can also be from anything you're seeing across the sector. And I think we'll go down the line. So we'll start with you here. Ken.
Sure, yeah. CIVIX is all about civic engagement, so I sort of selfishly want to say everything that we're doing. But also just so much of the organizations that are just here in this room and that we've had contact with. I mean, I think the civil society organizations are stepping up so much in providing youth opportunities to to be civically engaged. I mean, one of the just to shout out a little bit of the stuff that we do. I mean, we really want to. That's sort of our whole mandate, is we want young people to be more civically engaged. In our last student vote, we had almost 1 million young people go to the polls in their schools to cast their vote and to learn about democracy. So I think that is our biggest program, one of the ones that we see so much of an impact with youth all across the country.
Thanks, Ken. Erin.
So I think I sort of came at this question, I think one of our original draft questions that you had challenged us with was like, any policies or government actions that get us excited. And so I sort of tied this in to what I do think is working right now to strengthen youth civic engagement. And I did so by using a very specific definition of excited, because it was hard for me to come up with a policy or government action that I loved. So using a very specific definition of excited, I could not think of anything other than a few months ago when a high school student in Alberta asked a question at a town hall and was responded to by a high-level government staffer that they should have been spanked as a child for wanting to cause commotion by asking a question in a perfectly respectful manner that respected the format of the venue, etc. That, again, very specific definition of excited. I think that seeing things like this happen, I could say that that is something that is working. I don't know about you. I'm certainly no psychologist. I don't have a ton of experience around children. I have some family in town visiting. Maybe it's at the front of my mind. But I do have experience also I was a kid, and I was a very stubborn kid. And I also have experience as a very stubborn teen, and then a very stubborn young adult. And I don't know about everyone else in this room, but if there was one strategy to get me to give something a few more whacks and give it a go a few more times, it's to tell me that I cannot do it, or that I have no business doing it, or that I cannot do it well, etc. So I think maybe just reflecting on our own experiences, I don't know if that resonates with everyone, but I think that telling youth particularly, that their voices are not to be heard, or not to be too loud, not to be present in certain spaces, not to be, saying certain words, referencing certain identities. If you tell them not to, I am of the opinion that at least a few of them are gonna try and give it a go. So that's I think that is, it's an approach. I won't say that it's the best, most efficient approach, but I think that it could work.
Thanks, Erin. Ziyana?
I love your answer so much, and I couldn't agree more. Another thing that I think I sort of see working right now, it'll be no surprise to anyone here that our cost of living crisis is disproportionately affecting young people. And something that I'm seeing is young people gravitate more towards engagement and community building opportunities that are oriented around supporting employability, connecting with mentors, otherwise kind of navigating a system where young people feel really pushed out and like it's more challenging to access formal employment. There are some really great examples I can point to. Fora Network for Change has a program called RISE, and one of the ways it works is it trains young people to sit on nonprofit boards of directors, which is not a skill set that young people generally are sort of given access to training around. Apathy is Boring has great programs, including their Build program. And through Equal Voice Calgary, we run a program called She Governs every year in partnership with the City of Calgary, where high school youth have a chance to spend a day learning about municipal government and shadowing our women city councilors and senior leadership at the city. This year, we actually had 4 times as many applicants apply as we had seats available in the program. And so to me, this demonstrates that there really is interest for opportunities that are designed to set young people up for success as they sort of pursue their next chapter.
Okay, and I've just been given the warning that we are between you and lunch, and so I am not going to make you wait any longer, but I strongly encourage you to come ask questions of these phenomenal panelists during the lunch break, and as the rest of our afternoon progresses. I know we're one of the last things of the day, so stick around for the amazing keynote, and otherwise, thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists.